Hello everyone, Josh Maul here, and welcome to my very first Blender Cookie tutorial series. In this series we're going to be looking at creating this cute little cartoon stuffed animal scene. Part 1 we're going to take you through modeling the actual characters themselves, and Part 2 will be everything else. Setting up the textures and materials, the lighting, rendering out the final image, and doing a little bit of post-production. So I hope you guys enjoy, and with that let's jump right on into Part 1. Okay, so here we have our default brand new Blender screen. Now, the first thing I want to do is set up my workspace to be a little bit more efficient. For starters, I'm not going to need this timeline down here, it's just wasted space. So let's go ahead and get rid of that by clicking over on this corner, dragging it down, and getting rid of that. Now I want to set up a couple reference images. So to do that, I'm going to click that same tab, but drag over to the right to split my view. And I'm going to change this view to be a UV image editor. That way I can load in my reference image. There we go. And I can just see it at all times while I'm making my character. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Josh, that's an awful reference image. And yes it is. But for the purposes of this particular tutorial, it's going to work out just fine. Since we're not basing our character directly on the reference image as far as proportions, details, stuff like that goes, but more we want to use it as an overall idea of what the character is going to look like and the various pieces that we need. For example, we have a head, we have a trunk, we have some little button eye, we've got little stubby arms and legs, he's holding a bag of peanuts. We can see that the arms and legs are stitched on, the trunk is stitched on, so we have a general idea of what we want the final character to look like. So it'll be good enough for this. So let's go ahead and jump right into modeling. We'll hit 1 on the number pad and then 5 on the number pad to jump into a front view mode and an orthographic view. And with our default cube, I'm immediately going to hit Control 2 to apply a subsurf modifier with 2 subdivision levels. You can see that over here in the modifier stack. Got a subdivision with 2 levels there. And I'm going to instantly hit apply. And that will give me a sphere that is based on the cube. And the reason I do this rather than just inserting a sphere is it gives it a little bit more of an even geometry. There's no triangles in this sphere, and specifically in the next part when we begin unwrapping this and texturing it, it's going to be a huge time saver because we can unwrap this sphere the same way we would unwrap a cube. And for this, for a scene like this where it's going to have that fabric texture, we want it to look like it's made of fabric. If there was any pinching or stretching of the textures or weird warping of it around the model, it would look painfully obvious. So it's going to save us a lot of hassle down the road in the next part. All right, so I want to just get started right away. Start making his trunk. So I'll hit tab to go into edit mode, and then I'm going to click down here to go into face select mode so I can select individual faces. I'm going to select these 4 right in the front and hit 3 to go into side view mode. That's 3 on the number pad. And by hitting E to extrude, and if you get that little blue line that kind of holds it to a certain point or a certain direction, as you can kind of see here, I don't want to extrude that way. Even though Blender is kind of making me. If you click your middle mouse button or the mouse wheel, it gets rid of that and you can then drag it and move it wherever you want. Alright, so back here we have these 4 faces selected. 3 to go into side view, E to extrude, click that middle mouse button, and we can begin shaping the trunk. I'm hitting R to rotate, just kind of get it kind of positioned where I want, S to scale it, and G to grab, and we'll just extrude it a few times. We don't want a real big long trunk, and that'll do. All right, so I'm going to round out the trunk before I get any farther because we don't want a big square trunk coming off of his face. So I'm going back to vertex select mode. I'm going to select these vertexes here, and I'm going to scale them along the x-axis by hitting S and then X to lock them to the x-axis. Then I'm going to grab them and move them along with the y-axis by hitting G and then Y to just round out the front. We're going to do the same thing on the inside, selecting the same vertices along the inner part of the trunk there. Scale them along the x-axis, and then we're going to pull them the other direction along the y-axis just to round it out. All right. So I want to shape his head a little bit better. So I'm going to hit Z to toggle the wireframe view and C to toggle my my paint select tool, which will allow me to basically paint over what I want to select. So let's hit C to bring that up, and if I scroll up and down, it changes the size of my brush basically to give me, you know, if I want to select just this one here, or if I want to select, you know, his whole freaking head. All right, so I'm going to select these here, and for this part I want to turn on proportional editing. So I'm going to hit O to turn that on, and when I go to move, you'll see this new circle pops up. And if I scale that with the mouse wheel, you can see it changes the influence of my tool here. So since I'm moving these out, the more I expand the influence, the more it affects the other vertices around it. So using this, we're going to kind of just adjust this a little bit, pull this up here. Let's give him a little bit of a pointy head. Move it up along the Z-axis. I want to flatten out the bottom where his head is going to be meeting his body, since they're going to be kind of smashed together. All right. Jumping into front view mode, I'm going to select these two vertices and scale them along the X-axis. And that's just going to give it a little bit of that triangular shape that I kind of want. All right, that's good for right now. Now, any elephant needs big, goofy ears. So jumping back to face select mode, we're going to grab these right here. Let's go to our front facing mode, hit E to extrude, and boom, ears. Now they're not exactly positioned how we want, so we'll just kind of adjust these a little bit. I'm going to add an edge loop along the middle by hitting Control R. You can see it'll pop up a little purple line showing where it's going to put that, you know, edge loop. We'll click to add it to the ear, and it'll instantly begin sliding it up and down, where we can decide how far, or how far towards each edge we want that new edge loop to be. But if we right click, it'll snap it immediately to the center, and that's kind of what we want. All right, so we're going to scale that along the Z-axis by hitting S and Z to lock it to the Z-axis, to give it that big Dumbo ear look. Jumping to vertex mode, grabbing these three here and moving them in along the Y-axis. We can turn off proportional editing for this, just so we're not affecting all the other vertices. Kind of do something like that, just to give it kind of that cupped shape in the inside of the ear. And I want to pull this up because I want to keep kind of that thickness to the edges of the ear. Oops, not that one really. Okay, that'll be good for now. And I know you're thinking, hey idiot, you only put one ear on that elephant. Aha, you have spoken too soon, because now we're going to apply a mirror modifier to this model. So to do that, I'm going to hit Z to toggle wireframe mode, B to bring up my box select tool, which will allow me to just draw a selection box around what I want to select. I'm going to select the entire left half and hit X and delete vertices. Now up in the modifiers tab, I'm going to add in a mirror modifier along the X-axis, and I'm going to turn on clipping, because if clipping is not on, I'll show you really quick, these center vertices will not snap to that center point, which means we can drag them around any which way we want, leaving big holes in our elephant, which, you know, are not really ideal for stuffed elephants or real elephants. So we'll leave clipping on so that our elephant remains structurally intact. And one thing I always do, just because, you know, pushing and pulling vertices could get the center line a little bit off center, is I just alt-click to grab the entire edge loop around that center area, hit G to grab, and X to grab along the X-axis, and we can see that nothing moves, and that means that all of our vertices are snapped to that center point, and that's what we want. All right, so there we have the head of our elephant. All right, so let's add in the body. We'll do basically the exact same process. Well, let's go out of edit mode here. We'll add in a cube, drag it down a little ways, Control 2 to add that subsurf modifier, and then immediately apply it. And that gives us the same sort of cube sphere that we had before. Now, for cute characters, and I don't know why this is, I don't make these decisions, but for some reason, big heads and tiny bodies equals cute. So that's what we need to set up for this. So and we want him to have kind of a little bit of a gut as well. So we'll start, we'll turn proportional editing back on with O and jump back into wireframe mode. And we'll start by just kind of pull that up a little bit more influence, giving him a little bit of an egg shape here, and then maybe pulling, you know, turning the influence down a little bit, pulling this in like that. We want to flatten this out, kind of like we did for the head, where the head and the body are going to meet. We want that to be a little flatter. Okay, he's got some weird pointy shoulders going on. So we're going to do kind of like we did with the head, grab those, scale those along the x-axis, turn our proportional editing up a little bit to kind of get that shape that we want. There we go, something like that. And we want to make room for his arms, because his arms are going to be sticking out of right here and then kind of in front of him, and we don't want his arms to be way over here outside of his ears. So we want to make sure to leave enough room to shape the shoulders and then the arms. Alright, so that all looks pretty good. Maybe we can straighten out his back a little bit. He doesn't need to have quite such a, you know, a harsh back. Okay, that looks alright. If we want, we can grab that and move that up under the head, and that gives us a good idea of what the character is going to look like. So let's add in some arms and legs. So for the legs, this is amazingly easy. And what we'll do is we will grab these four faces right here. Let's go into front view mode so we can see what we're doing. Hit E to extrude, and I want to turn, actually it's already on, so we'll leave proportional editing on, and I want to rotate these and grab them and just kind of move them down to something like this. That looks alright. Before I go any farther, I want to round out his leg. So for this, I'll turn the proportional editing off. I'll just grab these vertices here and just round out this little stump. Maybe grab this one and these here and just kind of round out that connection point there where it actually connects to the body. Alright, that looks alright. So let's grab those four faces again and finish extruding out the legs. Extrude them out, and that's about as long as we want the legs to be. We want nice, short, stubby legs. Because again, cute. Let's flatten out the bottom of that foot. We can do that very easily by selecting those four faces on the bottom, hitting S to scale, Z to scale along the Z axis, and then 0, and then enter, and that will flatten those out right along that axis. And that looks pretty good. Alright. For the arms, we're going to do a very, very similar process. We're going to grab these two faces, which is going to be our shoulder point. E to extrude. We'll kind of get this set up in a shouldery way. We want to round this out like we did with the legs. And it's much easier to round this stuff out before you extrude it, you know, a dozen more times, because then you have to go through and round out each one that you extruded, and it just becomes kind of a pain. So just kind of like we did with the legs, we'll just round out this whole area here. Get that looking all right. Okay, select these two faces again. We'll flatten them out kind of like we did, because you can see it's pretty goofy looking there. So we will scale along the x-axis and then hit 0 and enter, and that will flatten those out right there. And then since we know his arms are going to be reaching in front of him, let's go ahead and shape them like that. Before I do anything, let's pull this vertex back in along this way. Got kind of cockeyed there. Okay. So let's rotate these two faces along the z-axis by hitting R and then Z. We want to point them forward. And then we want to pull them forward because, you know, they're not going to be quite so inside of his body there. We'll adjust some of these vertices around the shoulder area. That looks okay. Go and grab these. We'll pull them a little closer into his body because his arms are gonna be pretty close. All right. Grab these two faces again. Extrude them out again. Not very long because, you know, cute. Go to front view mode. We'll move them over this direction. I'm going to go ahead and tap out of edit mode, select his head, and hit H just to get it out of our way. We'll go back into edit mode on the body. And now, if we go into top view mode, we can kind of see, what our arm is doing here. Maybe select this one and we'll add another edge loop in here for the sake of giving us a little better armpit area. And also so we can grab these two, maybe scale them together a little bit and pull them out just a tad, just to give us a little bit more of a nice transition there without the arm looking all weird. Gonna add one more loop cut in about where his elbow would be if he had bones, and pull it out just a little bit, just to give his arm a little bit of that arc. And maybe select all of these, and I want to scale them up a little bit because I want his arm to get, both his arm and his leg to get a little bit fatter as they get towards the end. Because he is an elephant, he's got big flat feet, so we want to kind of, even though he's a stuffed animal, we want to kind of match that, a little bit. Alright, his arms are looking a little bit thin, so let's go ahead and select all these edge loops and scale them up. Okay, that looks alright. Let's grab these, pull them away from the body a little bit. We don't want his arm to be inside of his stomach. It's not very natural, even for a stuffed animal. I'm assuming, I've never been one, but alright, we'll pull this guy in like that. Maybe not that far. And again, just kind of adjusting those to where they look okay. Alright, so now we got that set up. We're going to once again add a mirror modifier by deleting the left half, adding a mirror modifier, and turning clipping on. And same as we did before, we're going to select this middle row here with clipping on, hit G to grab, and X along the X-axis, and we can see that a few of our vertices down there were not snapped to that center point. So if we just grab them until they are snapped, and if we grab along the X-axis, nothing moves, that's what we want. Alright, so here we've got our elephant mostly shaped out. Go in Tab to leave edit mode, Alt-H to unhide the head. And just to give us a little better idea, first off, let's move him up above this floor plane here. So his head isn't right in the middle of that grid floor. Okay, that looks a little more natural now. Now he's actually standing on something. But let's add in some subsurf modifiers on this so we can see a little better idea of what he's going to look like smoothed out. So selecting the head, we'll hit Control 2. Selecting the body, we'll hit Control 2. And there we go. That's actually looking pretty decent. Not too bad at all. Alright. So with this, the basic shape of the body in place, let's start adding in some of these details that are going to make him look like a stuffed animal. So for starters, we'll add in some of these seams around his body. We'll start with the head. The first thing I want to do is we have this little button eye. Now the button eye is going to go right about here, but the button's going to be sewn on and it's going to kind of be pulling in a little bit. There's not going to be much of an eye socket per se, but there's going to be a little indentation. So let's make that really quick. We'll select this face. We'll hit E to extrude, then right click to just leave it where it's at, and then S to scale it down. And we're just going to pull it in along just ever so slightly, just so there's a slight indentation kind of going right around where that trunk meets. And that looks alright. I'm okay with that, if you're okay with that. Alright, so let's add in some of these seams. The seams are actually really, really easy to add. So we'll start with the trunk connecting to the face. So to do that, we're going to add an edge loop in here, bring it up very, very close, not quite touching, but close to this edge up here. Then we're going to add another edge loop in between those two, and with it still selected, we're going to hit Alt-S, scale it in a little bit, and we're going to grab it along the Y-axis just to straighten out that seam just a tad, and there we go, we have a seam. Now, his trunk's a little bit square still, so while we're looking at it, let's even that out just a tad. Alright, that's a little better. I can deal with that. Alright, so for his ears, we're going to do basically the same thing. Add an edge loop, bring it down really close in here. Add another edge loop there. Alt-S to scale it down like this. And that actually looks pretty good so far. Okay. For the rest of the head, we want a seam going right down the middle, but we don't want it to affect the trunk. The trunk is not going to have a seam right down the middle. So what we're going to do is I'm going to select this edge loop here by Alt and then right-clicking on it. And by hitting Control and then plus on the number pad, it's going to extend my selection in both directions. And I want to go until it is selecting this middle edge loop that we created where the seam actually is. And with that in place, we're going to hit Y. And what that does, if we then, with this selected, hit G to grab, you can see it disconnects those pieces. And that's what we want, because we don't want anything that we do from the head on this point out to affect the trunk. So with the head, we're going to Alt-click and select this middle edge loop. And for this, we're going to turn clipping off on our mirror modifier. And with this edge loop selected, we're going to grab and move it along the X-axis. And you can see that puts a little split right down the middle of his head. We're going to turn clipping back on, grab, move it along the X-axis. Oops, I'm sorry. Extrude along the X-axis to refill in that little gap, and then Alt-S. And there we go. There's our seam down the middle of his head. And it does not affect the trunk because they are now two separate objects within the same object. Whoa. All right. We're going to do the same thing here on the body. So with that middle one selected, turn clipping off, move it a little bit away along the X-axis, turn clipping on, extrude back along the X-axis, and then Alt-S. And there's our seam along his body, just like that. The arms and legs, we're going to do basically like we did with the trunk. Create an edge loop, put it in, pretty close up here. Put another one in the middle, Alt-S. And these, you can see, they're kind of scaling up into the body a little bit. So we're going to jump into front view mode and just pull them back so they're a little bit more, centered between the two pieces. That looks all right. Maybe let's pull this up a little bit just to round off that shape there. All right. Go back into the arms. Do the same thing. Put these close to this joint here. Right like that. Alt-S. And then pull it back out of the body a little bit. And with this arm one, we don't want this little armpit area to look weird. So we're going to rotate along the Z-axis just slightly. Maybe adjust it a little bit like that. That looks pretty good. Yeah, I like that. And when we add the stitching into the character, it's going to really pull that look together. All right. At this point, I want to pose the character out a little bit because he's not just going to be standing straight like this. He's actually going to be kind of crouching, squatting down, offering his bag of peanuts to a little mouse character we're going to build here in a few minutes. So let's get started with that. Tab into edit mode on the body. I'm going to add one more loop cut to his leg to act as a knee joint, basically. And again, I'm going to hide the head while I do this just so I can see what I'm doing. Go to front view mode, Z to toggle wireframe, and C to bring up my brush select tool. And I want to select everything except the legs, including this right here. And I don't want to select any of these. And the legs, looks like there's a couple in there. Oops. Whoops. There we go. Okay. Make sure, just kind of grab and make sure. Okay, I got the ones I want. Going into side view mode, I'm going to put my cursor right here by just clicking. And I'm going to hit period to basically transform around the cursor. So this cursor is my new transform point. So if I hit R to rotate, you can see it rotates around that point. And that's what I want. I'm also going to turn on proportional editing just so we don't lose any of these seam details. Turn up just a little bit. So he's going to be kind of down here, like this. We want to move him forward just a little bit. And to give him that squatty look, we're going to, we're going to grab the bottoms of his feet and this edge loop as well. Go back into side view mode. I'm going to bring, let's turn proportional editing off. Make sure that's all I have selected. Okay. I'm going to bring those forward a little bit, kind of like this. Let's grab this one. Let's turn our, let's set our pivot point here back to median point. Okay, select this one, pull it forward a little bit, rotate it, maybe scale it up just a little. Grab this one here, pull it along the y-axis, just to make it look like he's kind of squatting down a little bit. That looks okay. Let's adjust some of these seams areas here. They got kind of goofed up. I probably should have done this before adding the seams in, but, you know, live and learn. Okay. And again, adding the stitching in is gonna cover up a lot of, you know, questionable areas on those seams. His legs still could probably come forward a little bit. Let's go ahead and select all of this here. Maybe rotate, drag it down. Again, it's just kind of playing with the vertices until you kind of get something that looks about right. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's tilt his arms down a little bit. Again, we'll set our cursor there and hit period to pivot around it, and that way we can just kind of turn on proportional editing. All right. Okay, I like that. Not perfect, but, you know, not terrible. If we hit Alt-H, we can see his head is now way off. So we can kind of grab that. We'll turn our rotating back to median point. Kind of rotate it, put his head about where we want it. Okay. And one thing we want to make sure when doing this, though, is we don't want to rotate, you know, this way, you know, or this way, or that way, or, you know, all these different directions, because we want him to, you know, when we hit front view, we want him to be looking straight at us. You know, when we hit side view, we want him to be, you know, looking straight in profile view, because when we go to add in the things like the stitching and stuff like that, it's going to be a lot easier if he's lined up already on those axes. All right. So speaking of the stitching, let's add that in really quick. I'm not going to take you through adding in the stitching on every bit of him. I'm just going to show you how to do it, and then I'm going to pause the video while I put in the rest of the stitching. So we're going to add in a curve, and it's going to be a Bezier curve. And we'll just grab that, move it out in front of him for now. Hit tab to go into edit mode, and we're just going to be using these 2 points, but we want these handles to be facing like so. And we're going to scale them down just a little bit so we get kind of a shape just like this. And this is going to be our stitch. We can shrink that down. 3 to go into side view, and we'll kind of line this up a little bit with our first stitch on our head, so we can get kind of an idea. Maybe scale it up just a little bit. Something like that will probably work just fine. All right. So for our curve here, we need to give it some thickness. So up in our object data panel here, first thing we're going to do is we're going to put our fill to full, and then our bevel depth, we're going to increase that until we get, you know, about the thickness we want for the stitches, which he's kind of a stylized, cartoony character, so thick stitches are okay. You know, this is all up to personal taste, as thick as you want them, basically. And we'll shrink them down just a little bit. I like that. And the other thing we want to do is we want to turn the resolution of the bevel up to 2, just so we get a rounder stitch. Okay, so with this in place, I'm going to go into side view mode, toggle wireframe, and at this point I'm basically just going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and then duplicate these stitches all around his head, just like so, you know, spacing them out however, you know, it's all up to personal taste, however many stitches you think he needs to hold his face together. And I'm not going to go all the way down the back because we're not going to ever see this character from the back, so there's no real reason to do it. So as you can see, that's all there really is to it. It's just taking these stitches, duplicating them, and then fitting them around all these seams. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while I get the rest of these stitches on, and I'll be back with you in just a minute. So I went around and put the stitches on the rest of the seams. Now you notice I only did one side, and that's because I'm going to just use a mirror modifier to apply these stitches over to the other side. Now the reason I haven't done that yet is because if you If I just told you that I did it and then expected you to do it, you'd run into a really interesting problem, and I will show you exactly what that is. So let's go ahead and select these, which I've made into one object by selecting them all, hitting Control J to combine them into one object. And let's just go ahead and apply a mirror modifier. So head to the modifier stack, mirror modifier, it's along the x-axis, and we can see what it's over here. And I said along the x-axis, and that ain't it. Well, the reason is because since we've been rotating these objects around, their rotation in reference to the world space has changed. So the x-axis for these objects is now like right here, and so it is actually technically mirroring along this object's x-axis. But obviously that's not what we want. So to fix that, with the object selected, hit Control A and apply rotation. Oh, I forgot one really important step. This little dot right here, this is kind of important. This is your object's origin point. So if we were to rotate, you can see it rotates along that origin point. Scaling, it scales along that origin point, and the mirror modifier uses that as its point. So the x-axis is from this point up. Well, we want to change that. So with our cursor centered along the x-axis here, if we have this selected, we go down here to Object, Transform, and then Origin to 3D Cursor. It will set that origin point wherever our 3D cursor is, which, since it's centered, you can see it now works properly like we want it. If for some reason, let's say you had clicked and put your cursor way over here, to recenter it, hit Shift-C, and it automatically puts the cursor right back on the meeting point where all the axes meet together. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and do the same for these. Add modifier, mirror modifier. Let's go ahead, Object, Transform, Origin to 3D Cursor, Control A, Apply Rotation. There's that one. We got here, add modifier, mirror modifier, Object, Transform, Origin to 3D Cursor, and Control A, Apply Rotation. And there we have all our stitches in place. Alright, so with this, the only thing we have left on our elephant is his little button eye. So let's make that really quick. Hitting Shift A, we're going to add in a circle, and we just want it to have about 12 vertices. So we'll grab it, move it over here, just to get it out of the way. Tab to go into edit mode. We'll hit E to extrude, and then S to scale it in, just to give a little lip to the button. E to extrude, and then down along the Z axis, and then E to extrude and take it in to somewhere around there. For our button holes, what we're going to do is we're going to add 2 loop cuts by hitting Control R and then scrolling up on the mouse wheel to increase the number of cuts. So we'll do just like that. Go to face select mode, select, see here, select these faces like that, hit X and delete faces. And there we will have our button. And for this little middle thing, little middle hole here, we can select all these vertices, hit extrude, scale, hit W to bring up this specials menu, and we'll hit merge at center, and then I'll just merge them at that point. Okay, so let's go ahead and select this outer rim here, E and extrude that down, and then E and scale, just so when we add our subsurf modifier, it gives this bottom edge a little bit of a roundness to it. And we'll alt select these edge loops here, E to extrude, and then down along the Z axis just a little bit, just so that they actually have some depth. Alright, we'll tab out of edit mode, hit Control 2 to add a subsurf modifier, and there we have a button. Now you notice the holes are not perfectly round, but for this, they don't really need to be. The one thing we do need to adjust though is if I add a smooth shader, you'll notice that that does not look at all right. And this is because for some reason, whenever I extrude anything from just a circle, it goofs up a couple of the normals. And what that means is these normals along this little pie wedge here are reversed or flipped differently than the other normals. But this is a very easy fix. If we hit A to select all, go down here on our menu to the normals section and hit recalculate, and it takes care of that, no problem. So now we have a nice little button. So let's fit this thing on his face. Just kind of eyeball it. Man, that was awful. All right, so, and you can see it'll kind of fit in this little indentation that we made earlier. Because when you actually sew a button onto something, it does kind of push in at the fabric a little bit, especially if you pull the threads nice and tight, which we're going to assume that whoever made this elephant did just that. So, you know, just kind of line it up so that no part of the button is actually sticking into the elephant. That looks pretty good. Scale it up to taste, you know, however big you think it should be. Now it's looking all right. So let's add the thread in really quick. We'll grab one of these. We'll hit Tab to go into edit mode. Select just one of these threads. Hit Shift D to duplicate it. P to separate it. Then we should have a separate little deal here, and we're going to get rid of the mirror modifier, and I'll show you what we're going to do with it here in just a minute. But with this thread selected, let's get it lined up with two of these holes here. Just really quick. I'm going to. If you ever want to put your object's origin point back towards like the middle of the object, just select it, go to Object, Transform, and Origin to Geometry. And that will put the origin point in the center of all the geometry, and that way we can rotate it like so. Alright, so let's try to get this thing lined up. We're going to scale it down so it fits a little bit better here. Tilt it like this. Okay, it doesn't need to be perfect. Alright. So once we have that one in place, we'll Shift D to duplicate it and then rotate it around. And then one of these we're going to pull down underneath the other, just because that's how it would actually look. And there we go. We have our button sewn on. Alright, so we're going to select both these curves. I'm going to hit Alt-C and convert these to a mesh from curve. And that will, as you can see now, turn them into an actual mesh object rather than a curve. We're going to select the button, both these curves, and then holding Shift, select down the head and hit Control-J to join. And as you can see, it duplicated it over here because it is now using the head's mirror modifier to put that over there. So our elephant is finished. All right. So let's go ahead and put in the rest of the objects we need. I'm going to get rid of this reference image here because we're not going to need it. I'm going to move to a new layer, and I'm going to add in a background image that I sketched up in about 4 seconds. So, you know, no laughing, please. There we go. It's a mouse. And we're going to use this to kind of, you know, act as our guide when making the mouse. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly. I don't want to take a whole lot of time. But basically what we're doing is just going to be extruding out points of this this cube here to shape the mouse, keeping in mind where we want some of our edge loops to be. For example, I know I want an edge loop around each of the feet, so I want to make sure to keep those there. I'm going to want one right here about where the back of the ear is, and then another one about where the front of the ear is. Okay. Extrude up again like this, and then we'll do one more for the front of the face. Okay, and we'll give him one more for his little butt back here. And we want to make sure to keep him nice and chubby because, again, cute. Alright, that's pretty good. He's a little blocky, so we're going to add an edge loop right down the middle. Going to select both of these top edge loops, scale them along the y-axis, just to shrink those in a little bit. Actually, before we do that, what I'm going to do is add an edge loop right down the middle like that. Then I'm going to select these, scale them along the y-axis, and do the same on the bottom, but not scale them quite as much, because he's going to be a little fatter towards the bottom than he is at the top. His little face here, I want to scale this way in, So the mouse is going to have a nice pointy face, and these ones we can scale in a little bit too, to give them a nice face, and maybe scale this one in along the y-axis just to give it a little bit of a separation there between the body and the head. Okay, that looks pretty good. For the tail's going to be really easy. I'm going to grab these two here, hit E to extrude, scale them way down, and just like we did on several other pieces here, we're just going to round this guy out. Because we want a nice round tail. And I'm not worried about getting these sides, you know, perfect, because we're going to be adding a mirror modifier in, so. Okay, that'll be good enough. Select these two faces again, go into our front view mode, and we'll keep this one pretty close here, and then we will just extrude out kind of along the shape of this tail here that I drew. I know you guys are thinking, wow, you're really good at drawing that mouse, and I appreciate that you think that. Add a few more in here just to give it a nicer curve. Okay, that'll be fine. For these legs, first thing I want to do is add in a little bit more geometry. So I'm going to add an edge loop in here and an edge loop in here. And on both of these, once I get them on there, I'm going to hit Alt S and scale them out just slightly, just to kind of keep a little bit of that roundness. All right, that looks pretty good. For the legs, really simple. Selecting both of those faces, I'm going to turn on proportional editing. E to extrude. I'm going to drag them down like this. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, let's rotate these out just a little bit. Then hit E to extrude. Grab them, pull them kind of like this. Scale them along the y-axis. And then we'll take each of these faces individually, shrink them down, rotate them so they don't look quite so weird. Let's take a look. There we go. Short and stubby because, you know, cute. Okay. Alright, that looks pretty good so far. I'm going to add one little detail to his nose here. I'm going to rotate these just a little bit, pull them back kind of like this, and then extrude them out and scale them down just to give him a little bit of an actual little nose there. Alright, so the last thing we need is his ears. I'm going to add an edge loop along this corner here, and again, just Alt S just slightly, just to give it a little bit of a bulge. I'm going to grab this edge loop and I'm going to pull it down along the y-axis and then down along the z-axis just to round that out a little bit. And for the ear, I'm going to grab these two. Actually, I'm going to grab all three of these faces here, hit E to extrude, and let's start shaping this to look a little bit better. Pull these back. Maybe pull, let's see, we'll grab these, maybe pull these. Using that proportional editing, we'll kind of pull these out. Okay, add another edge loop in here, scale it out just a little bit. And we want to give his ears a little bit of that cup shape like we did with the elephant. So we'll pull those in a little bit. I'm going to pull all of these in this way. And then these two middle vertices, I'm going to pull in just a little bit more. And these outer ones, I'm going to pull out. Did I get that one? I'm going to pull, yeah, kind of like that. And his ears is a little bit fan shaped, so we'll just kind of, you know, just really quickly kind of shape this out a little bit. Alright, that'll be fine. So now if we tab out of edit mode, again, you're thinking, hey, idiot, only one side. Ha 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 ha, mirror modifier. Okay. Time to go back into edit mode. Z to toggle wireframe. We're going to delete this entire half. And I know for a fact that a few of these vertices got moved past that mirror point, so I'm going to select this whole middle section and grab it along the y-axis just slightly. Go ahead and add in the mirror modifier, switch it from X to Y, turn on clipping, and then grab and pull those back along the y-axis. Oh, let's turn off the proportional editing because we only want to grab that middle edge there. And we got something goofy going on up in here. Let's take a look. Oh, okay, we just got a few of these vertices just got a little stupid. We'll just kind of smooth this area out just a little bit. Alright, so with that all in place, let's hit Control-2 to add a subsurf modifier. You can see we have a mouse. I'm going to play with this tail just a little bit. It again got a little goofy looking. I'm going to hit Alt-S to fatten that up. I don't want it to be quite so thick. It's just got a lot of geometry in here. I'm sure I probably could have done this a little bit better, but in fact, you know what? We're just gonna go ahead and nix this whole tail because it's gonna drive me absolutely insane. So what we'll do is just get rid of those vertices. And we'll start this over from scratch. We'll round this out a little bit so it's a little bit nicer shaped, not quite so goofy. Select all those, scale X0 to flatten that out. Push that right back up against his butt there. Maybe pull these out so it's a little smoother. Okay. Back to 1. Now we will extrude these out. And then we'll extrude out again, scale, W, merge at center. Ooh, what happened? Oh, okay. And we'll pull those along the y-axis to a clip there. Okay. That's a little better. All right. And you know, we could spend a while tweaking the shape of the mouse here, but for the sake of this part of the tutorial, we're going to call him good. He's a cute little mouse. All right. Let me check my time here really quick, see how we're doing. 56 minutes. Goodness gracious. Okay. So with the mouse in place, let's go ahead and select this layer, bring our elephant back. Notice our mouse is ginormous, so we'll rotate this guy like that. I'm going to scale him way down. Okay, put it like so. Want our elephant to be looking at him. I'm going to turn the elephant's, tilt the elephant's head down just a little bit more so he's kind of looking at the mouse. There we go. Alright, and one thing we need is we need something for the elephant to be holding in his hands. So very, very quickly, I'm going to show you how to do that. We'll grab a cube, go into edit mode, face select mode, delete this top face. Going to grab this loop here, E to extrude, S to scale, and then E and extrude it down. This is going to kind of give us that folded over paper bag look. Control-2 to apply a subsurf modifier. I want this to kind of go down like that. And scale on the Y just a little bit. Okay, something like that works. And we don't need it to be highly, highly detailed. One thing I'm going to add is a displacement modifier. Not so we can do that, but so that we can do this. We'll go ahead and hit New under the texture. And under the strength here, we're going to turn that down. We just want to give it a little bit of random variation so that it looks a little bit more like you know, a little paper bag that has been folded over and has a bunch of peanuts in it. Okay. And maybe we can Control-E, edge slide this up a little bit. Alright, I like that. That's fine for now. So we'll go ahead and grab that. We'll get that positioned in his hands. We want to make it look like he's offering them to the mouse. Isn't that adorable? Move that along the x-axis. And I'm not too worried about this little, you know, part of his body going in because it's not going to be noticeable. Okay, so that works. The next step is the peanut. Now I'm going to be showing you a technique that I borrowed from a who used this technique to show me how to make a grenade, but I adapted it to show you how to make a peanut. So we'll start by adding a sphere, changing the segments down to 8 and 6 for the rings. Grab that up here. Tab to go into edit mode, X to delete this vertice. Select everything, Shift D to duplicate. Down along the Z axis, rotate it 180 degrees, and then we're going to connect these faces really quick. And to do that, we're going to select these edges right here and then hit F to create a face between them. Okay, let's get a little better peanut shape here. Get all these, scale these out, scale them along the Z axis a little bit. Now if we add a subsurf modifier, that's looking like a peanut, but it needs a little bit of a bumpiness to it like peanuts have. So to do that, we're going to select all of these faces except for these end caps. We don't want to select those. And we want to do one thing before we bother extruding. We want to, down here on our pivot point, we want individual origins. And I'll show you what that's going to do in just a second. If we go here on the left to extrude individual, you can see that it pulls these out, each individual face. And you can see how this could very easily make a hand grenade. But we're going to push them in just a little bit. You don't want a whole lot, just a little bit in, something like that. And then we're going to hit S to scale. And since we set it to individual origins, each of these faces is going to scale along their individual origin. And what that does is if we then hit tab, we have a nice little peanut. And that is pretty nice looking. So with that, we can scale that way down, grab that, move it over here, and we can just, you know, add a bunch of peanuts, hitting Shift D. You know, we'll just add a bunch of these little peanut guys in here. Just make it look like this bag is full of peanuts. Oh, and if you ever want to just like free rotate an object, the way you do that is by hitting R to rotate and then R to rotate freely, which it just kind of pivots it around the origin point. Just allowing you to really quickly, you know, just give it a kind of a random rotation like that. Okay. And just kind of, you know, fill these in here. Okay, I like that. Maybe move this guy up here. All right, and with that, let's go ahead, add a smooth shader to our elephant here, and the modeling is finished. We now have an adorable little elephant, adorably offering some adorable little peanuts to an adorable little mouse. In part 2 of this tutorial series, we're going to be going through the process of creating a bump texture from scratch for the fabric materials, and I'm going to be showing you how to do that using both Blender and Photoshop or GIMP. We're going to go through how to apply the textures, how to set up the materials, creating a simple environment for the characters to exist in, setting up the lighting and rendering out the final image, and doing a little bit of post-production work to finish it all up. Well, hope you guys enjoyed this first part, and I will see you in part 2.